The FMCSA stands for Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration. Their job is to make sure that motor carriers, trucking companies, operate their companies, their trucks, in a safe manner. That is their mandate. That is what the S in FMCSA stands for. It stands for safety, and their mandate is to ensure that trucking companies operate safely. So imagine my surprise last week when the FMCSA decided to take another step backwards and grant a waiver to Wilson Logistics, allowing them to run trucks down the interstate with unlicensed drivers at the wheel. FleetNav Systems is an ELD provider that's doing things a little bit differently. They want you guys to be able to talk to someone who's been in your shoes, so they've hired an over-the-road driver to help answer your Geotab ELD questions. Check out their YouTube channel with their interview with Sarah, her previous over-the-road experience, and her current work with FleetNav. If you want an ELD provider that provides the best service, I highly recommend FleetNav Systems. So after I took a couple of Valiums, I thought, I'm going to research this a little more, because this just can't be right. But what this waiver allows is that they do have a driver trainer, and he only needs a couple months experience, but he's riding in the bunk because he's got to rest to obey the hours of service rules, because they're running these trucks like licensed teams. Only an unlicensed driver is operating the truck for 50% of the time. And I thought, man, I just couldn't believe it. I did some more research. Turns out these waivers that are not publicly announced, the first one was granted to CR England in 2015. And I thought, how did they even go about getting such a thing? It turns out that in 2015, the FMCSA granted CR England a waiver at the behest of the American Trucking Association. Who was head of the American Trucking Association at the time? Dan England was the head of the ATA. So no wonder the FMCSA gave them this waiver. The ATA has long influenced policy decision by the FMCSA, because the FMCSA doesn't know anything about trucking and driving trucks. So they rely on the ATA for all that information. So they granted the first one of these waivers to CR England in 2015. CR England is a huge mega carrier with probably one of the worst crash records in the history of trucking. Now, recently, CR England announced that they were all excited because they were introducing 3-bunk trucks. Now, I understand completely the hype of these 3-bunk trucks, because what that allows CR England to do is operate 3 guys in a truck, 2 unlicensed drivers rotating, and a 3rd licensed driver that only needs a couple of months' experience to be acting as the driver trainer behind him. So they can literally run this truck non-stop, week in, week out, and operate it cheaply, because they don't have to pay licensed drivers, because 2 of them aren't licensed at all. Now, Werner Transportation, and it's unclear whether Werner has one of these waivers or not, because they don't announce that stuff. But Werner Transportation, in the last couple of years, lost a couple of multi-million-dollar lawsuits in crashes involving unlicensed drivers at the wheel and driver trainers in the bunk. And rightly so, because even though the FMCSA may or may not say it's okay and give them a waiver, the courts don't agree with that necessarily. They found fault with the trucking company in both cases and awarded tens of millions of dollars to the plaintiffs, and rightfully so. So here now again last week, the FMCSA has granted another one of these waivers. And it's not just a test period waiver, it's a 5-year waiver, allowing Wilson Logistics to run down the highway with unlicensed drivers at the wheel of their trucks. And there's nothing safe about this practice. If you're a homeowner and you call in a plumber or an electrician, you want them to be licensed. The law requires them to be licensed for insurance purposes. Yet, You can take your family and be driving down the interstate in your car and have an unlicensed guy behind the wheel of the semi beside you. There's absolutely nothing safe about this practice at all. There's no safety involved. It's simply a matter of the FMCSA catering to these mega carriers that belong to the ATA to help them solve their driver shortage problem and to help provide them with cheap, unlicensed labor, because they don't even have to pay licensed drivers. They're paying unlicensed people to run these trucks. Now, that's just wrong, pure and simple. So I suggest that they drop the S out of FMCSA and they can just be the FMCA, because there is no safety practice anymore in half the things that they're doing. Now, hopefully, Todd Spencer and this newly appointed drivers board will be able to talk some sense and experience into these people at the FMCSA, but they certainly have their work cut out for them when they're granting waivers like this and allowing non-licensed drivers behind the wheel of these semis. At the end of the day, this is an unsafe practice. It should be stopped, and it bothers me that these waivers are not general public knowledge. It's a matter of not telling the public about it. It's kind of like keeping them in the dark, and this goes against the best public interest and against all safety standards as far as I'm concerned. Okay. Got a story for you. It does involve some aspect of safety. Many years ago, a trucking company that I worked for got bought out, and the new owners came in to throw their weight around to see what they wanted to change and that type of thing. And one of the things they implemented was that everybody in the yard and in the shop must be wearing safety boots, safety vests, the whole 9 yards, just to stand out more. It was a goofy little thing, but they insisted on it. It was a big protocol. So my friend Larry comes in from being out on the road, and he's been out on the road for a month or so, doesn't know any of this stuff. He's just dressed like a regular truck driver, no safety vest or anything. He's cutting through the shop after parking his truck in the yard, and here's a guy in the shop with a 3-piece suit, $2,000 shoes on, looking like $1 million, but he's got a safety vest on, and he points to Larry and says, "Hey, where's your safety vest?" Larry's striding through the shop. He looks over at the guy, doesn't know who he is, doesn't skip a beat and goes, "Where's your safety boots?" And just keeps on trucking. Doesn't think anything of it. Turns out this guy in the 3-piece suit, A, was one of the new owners, B, didn't have any safety boots on, and C, tried to have Larry fired for being insolent. Well, Larry became a legend at that place after that, got to keep his job, but I thought it was a funny story. So stay safe. Even if the people at the FMCSA don't care about your safety, we at Smart Trucking do. Keep the rubber side down, and we'll see you on the backhaul.